Hi, my name is Sarah Lee. I'm just going to share my story with you. I grew up in a church-going home. So it wasn't a Christian home, but we went to church. But nothing else in our home was Christian-like. And for as long as I can remember, my mom and my dad, they fought all the time. I mean, I can't remember a day that they weren't fighting. And on top of that, my dad was always sick. And eventually it got to this point where my mom said, that's enough. And she took me, left my dad and left my older brother, and she just took me. And we left. And for 2 years, it was just me and my mom. It was 4th and 5th grade for me. And it was just the two of us. And I was happy. I didn't really know that, okay, we left that. It didn't really hit me because I was so young. But when we were together, after 2 years, for 2 years, she was struggling with depression, just feeling so lonely. And, the pressures of having to raise me on her own was starting to get to her. So after 2 years, she turned to me and she said, I'm going back home, and I'm going to go live with my sister. And I'm like, a 10-year-old, I'm like, okay, sure. And then she's like, I'm going to leave tomorrow, okay? And I said, okay. And she's like, call your dad. And I said, okay. And I'm in this apartment and it's morning and she's like, I'm leaving now, bye. And she leaves the apartment, she closes the door, and I'm a 10-year-old and I'm sitting in this empty apartment and it's just hitting me. And I'm just bailing my eyes out. I'm just crying and crying and crying because now I'm like, oh, I am really alone now. My mom has left me and I'm in this empty apartment by myself. So I call my dad and he comes and picks me up and I go to live with him and my brother and my stepmom. And it's like that for a few years. But my dad was always sick. He's always been sick. And it got to a point where his sickness overcame him and he passed. And so now it's just me and my brother. And my brother, he just started college. I just started high school. And now my brother can't go to school because he has to support us. So that pressure and I fell in with the wrong crowd. I'm sorry. Well, I fell in with the wrong crowd in high school, so I would just skip school all the time. And I would just do all sorts of things, and my brother would find out, and he'd get so angry because he's working so hard to support us. But we just keep fighting, and eventually I was like, okay, I'm tired of this. And so I ran away. And I was 15 at the time, and I decided I'm going to go live on my own. So I ran away from home, and at this point in my life, I'm like, okay, my dad is gone, my mom is gone. I can't rely on anybody. So I'm like, whatever God, I learned about when I was young, if he is real, well, he's cruel and he's evil, because how could he do something like this to me? And so I'm on my own, and I'm just, I'm renting a room, I'm working, and, all this time, I had no family, but God always took care of me. He got me a job with a good Christian man at his company, and I'm young, so no one who would give me a job to me, but he did, and he would pray with me, he would mentor me, and he would feed me because I was so hungry all the time. And I was just living like that, just working. I stopped going to school because now I have to work. So I was pretty much a high school dropout at freshman year. And I'm walking down the street one day. Now at this point, I'm like 17 or 18. I'm walking down the street. I see this sign in front of a church, and it's like, oh, service. I'm like, oh, I'm so lonely. I hate God, but I'm so lonely. So let me just go to this service. So I go in, I don't connect with anybody at the church, but this one church member, he gives me this CD. And he wasn't even there like the whole time, he was just visiting that day, but he gives me the CD and it's a sermon and he's like, listen to this. And I'm like, okay, but I just kept it, I held on to it for weeks. And eventually one day I was in the office alone and I'm like, you know what, let me listen to this thing. I pop it in and the Lord just began speaking to my heart. And he was like, I've never left you, right? I was always with you. When you thought you were alone, I was always there. And that he loves me, even though I don't have a father, well, he's my father. He's my father. And even though it seemed like I had no mother, well, he loves me like a mother. And he just, I didn't even really know my word, but he just spoke so clearly into my heart. He said, I never left you, I never forsake you. And he just spoke those passages to me. And I was just like, okay, God, okay, I give my life to you. And so I gave my life to him that day in the office by myself. And then shortly after, I got this email. And it came from this weird sender, just some foreign sender. And it was an empty body, but the subject title said, hi. So I said, okay, spam, delete. And then a few months later, another email, hi, Sarah. And I'm like, oh, this is creepy, but I deleted it. And then a few months later, hi, Sarah, again. And I'm like, what is this? It's from the same sender. And I keep marking it as spam, but it keeps coming to me. And then a couple months later, it's like, I love you. And I'm like, okay, this is some creepy stalker stuff. So I mark it as spam, I reported all of that, and then nothing happens for a while. And then a good couple months later, it says, I love you, Sarah, again. I'm like, wow, what's gonna take to get this email to stop coming to me? And I delete it. I'm like, that's enough. This is ridiculous. But then a few weeks later, another email comes, and in the subject title, it says, this is mom. And I'm like, for some reason, I just never questioned that was my mom. And when she left me, there wasn't any email or anything like that. We didn't even have dial-up. And so I was like, okay, that's my mom. I replied. And we reconnected. And to this day, I don't even know how she got my email, but, God is so good. And when we reconnected, she started to call me, she was sending me packages, all of that. But, I'd been so accustomed now to living on my own and being on my own that it was just like, okay, that's nice. She's there. But there was no emotional connection. There was nothing there. And I was in my word one day, and I was reading Matthew 5, and there's this passage that says, if you have a sacrifice at the altar and you remember that a brother has something against you, then put down your sacrifice and go be reconciled with that brother and then come back. And the Lord spoke to me so clearly, and he said, don't offer me your sacrifices, reconcile with your mom and then come back to me. And I said, oh Lord, because I realized at that point that I was harboring a lot of unforgiveness. I was so angry at her for leaving me all alone and causing me to suffer. And in a sense, I was also angry at my dad for leaving me, even though that wasn't his choice. And so I called her, and I was just real with her. And I told her, Mom, you have no idea how much you hurt me and how angry I was at you. But the Lord has forgiven me for what I've done to him, so I forgive you. And so she started breaking down, and I'm breaking down, and there's just so much healing over the phone. There's so much healing. And there was this love that I had for it I never had before. And now to this day, she's a Christian, she's saved, she's come to know the knowledge of the Lord, so she has that peace. And I know that I may not be able to see her now, but I definitely see her in heaven. And my brother, who I ran away from, who's right there, God reconciled our relationship, and he's also a believer. So God is so faithful. No, I didn't have any earthly father, and my mom was not around. I had no family, but God was always there, and he's never left me. He will never leave me, and he'll never forsake me. Thank you.